Okay, I'm here with. I think I'm putting this on a new channel. It's the second episode of New Left Radio, but we'll call it the first because I did do one recording earlier, but it's on my main channel, which makes no sense. No one wants to see it there. So yeah, I had this idea of New Left Radio a long time ago, and the reason I wanted to do it was I was really getting fed up with all of the discussion around left wing versus right wing having to do with, let's say, the social issues side of things, and identity politics and all of this other stuff, rather than economics. And the premise was that economics affects everyone, and economics is used in order to hold either you know some parts of society down or all parts of society down. It really depends where you're living, what the government's like, and what kind of economic policies they have. And that also all fits into with justice as well, right? But for me, the main focus was economics, because I felt that people were in a very privileged position at that point in time, in the sense. This is going back to like 2014, 2015. There was cheap credit everywhere. There was a very good economy that had recovered from the very bad economy of 2008, 2009 in the States. Canada, our recession back then lasted for like half a year, and then we bounced back, and we've been going up ever since. And it just seemed to me that people had lost sight of economics, basic economic principles, and that we were in for some real trouble. And a few years ago, my feeling on it was, well, the trouble is here. It's going to take a little while to get through it, but hopefully afterwards things will be better, and it'll make it a better country. But today I'm here with very bad news, I think, and I'm hoping that I'm wrong, because I wouldn't say I'm an optimist, but I've been somewhat optimistic that we can fix what's gone wrong in Canada. And I'm going to describe essentially what has gone wrong here. And I'm then going to get in what some people think the solutions are going to be, and I'm going to explain how those are not the solutions. And that there is very little other than government incompetence that is going to actually cause things to be finally resolved. Okay, so what is the problem in Canada? The problem in Canada is that we have allowed property values to continue skyrocketing when we should have had a major correction around 2009. We didn't really have that, and as a result, people became very confident that there was never ever going to be a time where property prices would go down in Canada, and more and more and more of our money has been placed in real estate, okay? So that's one thing that's going on. The other thing that has been going on that kind of has coincided with all of that was that we generally introduced birth control in the late 60s. Now, when people have the choice to have children or not to have children, it becomes very important for the society where they're living because this is the thing about capitalism. Capitalism loves growth, right? More money being spent all the time, GDP increasing constantly. Otherwise, everything starts to fall apart very rapidly, right? So, but the point is, if you have a society where fertility rates are a choice that people have, you then have to think as a society, well, how do we encourage people to have children to the point where it helps to expand the country economically? Now, the other way of expanding a country economically is to export lots of goods. But the fact is, capitalism loves expanding. That sound is my dog getting fed up with me and leaving the room. But in order to do that, governments have to give people honest answers about where our society is heading. And sometimes they're not very good at that because they don't want to lose an election, right? Now, I think when things really started to fall apart in Canada, can be traced back to this thing. It's so funny because we still talk about it today and people are still complaining about it. But there's this thing, the GST. And so Mulroney was the person, I guess, who was spearheading, or it was his government that was in charge when they wanted to introduce the GST, the Goods and Services Tax. And there was a good reason why they wanted to do it. I'm not going to say whether the implementation was good and it made sense and how it worked out economically afterwards, because that's an entire paper to be written about that. But the premise was that the government was taxing manufacturers, okay? And that was driving up the price, even for exports, right? So for them, because they're being taxed by the government before they export something, it's making them less competitive. So the thought was, yes, we should tax this later on in the chain so that these manufacturers can export more. It's good for the country, it's good for the GDP, it's good for jobs if we do that, because we know exporting, to have a trade deficit can be very bad for a country. But people did not believe in this. And Canadians hate taxes. Canadians hate taxes so much. And we're going to get to Trudeau soon because there's a huge issue coming up with him for that. But Canadians hate taxes. And so at the end of it, the GST was reduced. And when Harper got in, he got in saying, I'm going to reduce the GST some more. And he reduced it. And I think Trudeau's kept the reductions in GST. I'm not really all that sure on it. But the problem with that is that this tax existed before, and so when you're doing that, you're actually taking away government revenues. And there are I think just about every province in Canada and the federal government has deficits continually now, right? And if there's a province that doesn't, you can say it in the comments. But the problem with that is that if you want to create a society where you can encourage people to have children because you can make it a decent life experience for them, it's hard to do that when you're driving up deficits already and you're not paying for things properly. Instead, you are using debt in order to pay for your healthcare system and stuff like that, right? Which is essentially what we're doing at this point in time. And so what ends up happening is there are fewer and fewer services. We're talking today about having $10 a day daycare and finally getting it rolled out across Canada. Well, it's too late. Like, I'm glad that they have it for the people that decide to have children now, because it is very expensive to have children. But as far as from an economic policy changing the direction of where this country is going, it's far too late, okay? Because our fertility rate has been on the decline and the decline and the decline because we have not been providing the services that make it a decent life experience to have children. But this goes all the way back into the 70s and 80s, and it just continued to get worse and worse and worse. Another reason that it's gotten worse and worse is that Canadians refuse to pay taxes, but they think nothing of paying $800,000 for a house that a few years ago, like a decade ago, was worth $250,000. And all of their money is being dumped into real estate, right? And interest. Canadians hate paying taxes, but paying $800,000 over their lifetime in interest doesn't seem to be a problem. So essentially what ends up happening is that life becomes so expensive. Like over the past 15 years, life has become so expensive that having children is becoming less and less of an option. And so we have a huge issue that we have never dealt with, and that is the fact that baby boomers are retiring. They're also healthier than in previous generations. They're staying at home. And that is continuing to push up the price and everything. But the thing is, as a country, we have known that this day is coming for 30 to 40 years now. And we have done none of the things that we needed to do in order to prepare for this day. Our long-term care is a joke. In Ontario, a former premier runs and owns some long-term care private institutions. That's give you an idea what's wrong with this country, right? Our healthcare system is falling apart on the provincial level. And this has been going on for a long time. It was before the pandemic, but things were made much worse during the pandemic here, because the Conservative government that we voted in here passed a bill, Bill 124, which severely restricted the bargaining rights of healthcare workers. Right? And I'm not good. You can look it up. But essentially, they were getting paid crap already. They're living through the pandemic, and they were being limited as to how much a raise they were going to get every year. And it was lower than the cost of living increases every year. And then, of course, we had the huge inflation, and there weren't any adjustments made for that. And this went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was knocked down as being unconstitutional. So that's how much government is helping. We need health care, but we refuse to pay for it, and the Ford government will do anything they can to destroy public health care in this province. It was obvious with that, because a thinking and rational human being would say, we need more healthcare workers. What are we going to do with the budget to make it so that we can have this? And it's going to hurt in some other areas, but they're like, no, what we're going to do is to destroy the profession of these people, treat them like absolute crap, and drive them out of the country and out of the workforce. Right? So that's just a perfect example of, not only could we not 30 years ago start thinking about the future, even while the future is here, Doug Ford has his head so far up his ass that he cannot do anything to correct this problem. As a matter of fact, he just wants to take advantage and to make it worse. So yeah, the basic point is this, Mulroney, and then Kim Campbell came in after Mulroney, with the GST was absolutely destroyed, and there were some other things that people didn't like, whatever. He was a progressive thinking person. Was he right? I don't know, but his party got destroyed on this. And since then, we really have not had any progressive thinking in politics at all. And I know that I'm saying economically progressive in the sense of thinking outside of the box, looking at the actual situation that you have and coming up with solutions, rather instead of having dogma. And dogma is things like remove red tape and the economy gets better. Does it? There's no evidence of that at all. So the government has to be involved in a lot of things. It's an absolute joke. The right wing, Teresa, no, what was her name? The last female prime minister in the UK is a perfect example, and her entire team, because they were just like, oh, we're just going to use Reaganomics and fix everything, and they almost destroyed the pound, and they had to leave with their tail between their legs after a few short months, right? Because it's not necessarily, although I don't think Reaganomics was great, that Reaganomics is bad. It's just that look at the situation that you actually have. You're absolutely going to destroy the economy and the pound. Are you out of your mind? Right? So anyway, I'm going a little bit off tangent there. So the basic point I'm trying to make, though, is that we have not planned for the future. We haven't made the hard decisions. We've gone further and further into debt. We've invested, instead of investing in productivity and technology and competing with other countries around the world, we've thrown all of our money into real estate, which is completely overvalued, and it is making it too expensive to live here, and that's boiling over into rents as well. But why is it boiling over into rents? Because the Trudeau government panicking, realizing that I think large companies are lobbying them, saying wages are going to go up because boomers are retiring. We can't get enough people. And our fertility rate's been on the decline for so long. They decided that we need a few million people to come into Canada that we can take advantage of. I don't believe anything else they've ever said, to do these low wage jobs. And we have not invested the appropriate money into infrastructure, healthcare, any other social services, housing, or anything to support people coming here. It is a Hail Mary. We didn't have enough children. It looks like we're in trouble, so this is our Hail Mary. And it is something that is going to change this country, perhaps, well, forever. I think that the Canada we knew is done, and it's not because we have a diverse group of people coming into the country. That has nothing to do with it. I'm talking about economics. What we needed in Canada several years ago was a recession in order to rebalance everything, right? And people were going to have to take losses because we had property values that absolutely made no sense in comparison to incomes, because incomes have not been going up at the rate that property has been going up. It just doesn't make sense. But we needed a recession in order to fix that. But the central banks and the Canadian government are hell-bent on never having a real recession. And so rates get cut, and as soon as there's trouble, somehow we get out of it, and then confidence comes back and we start spending again. And that gets us to where we are today. But why do I say we're done this time? We're done this time because interest rates have gone up, and I do see some evidence of prices going down on properties and stuff like that, but I think it may be too late. I think we're heading into an area of stagnation or stagflation. People are holding on for dear life to the property values that they have, and they have a lot of faith in them. And there's not, as far as I can tell, there's not a lot of properties being sold, which means it's hard to find what the actual value is. You know, the more liquid something is, the quicker you find the value of it. That's how stocks work, right? I don't think anyone has any concept of what the value of real estate is in this country, and everyone is terrified because things are so bad now that we have people living illegally in houses where there might be 10 to 14 people living, where the house, for code reasons, might support 5 people, right? We've got tenants that are moving in and then redividing houses and then letting it out to many people. Everyone thinks this is a great time for the landlords and they're making lots of money. A lot of landlords are having their houses destroyed. A lot of landlords are having trouble evicting someone because the people who are living in the house have nowhere to go. And these are people that maybe in the past they'd say, oh yeah, okay, we've been evicted, we'll move somewhere else. But at this point it's like, well, I'm going to end up living on the streets because rent for me and my 2 kids is $2,500 to $3,000 a month, right? And I had some optimism in the past that these things could be resolved, but it's now at a point where we are not going to resolve these things. We are not going to build housing at the rate that we need it for all of the people that have moved to Canada. And while it doesn't make sense, I think, for a lot of people that have come here, and I think a lot of people are having regret, it doesn't mean that they're going to leave the country, right? And the government is incompetent in dealing with this because the government a long time ago washed its hands of dealing with real estate, you know, low-cost housing and purpose-built rentals and all this other stuff. So, is Canada done? Well, you know what? I won't talk about my vision of what Canada was. Okay? I want to talk about the people that moved to Canada, let's say, in the late 70s and 80s that I've met, right? Why did they love it here? Well, they were able to buy a home, a sizable home, with a sizable yard, right, in the suburbs, not necessarily in Toronto, but in the suburbs, for a reasonable price. Maybe they would have the down payment on that house in 3 years. And with the payments on the mortgage, it would take up definitely a lot less than half of their income, which means they had spending money. So all of this was kind of good for the economy. Now, a lot of these suburbs, it was actually not a great plan, because their way of paying for infrastructure was the developer fees, on new builds. So it really meant there was a lot of sprawl and more and more and more builds. But generally, for those people that came here, there was work. It wasn't overly expensive. Canada has rights. You have rights as an employee here that you don't have in a lot of other places. And we have like minimum wages and severance guarantees and stuff like that. So it was a decent place. I don't see how anyone could luck into that today. If you come to Canada today and you want to buy a house, I don't care what house, it is going to cost probably over $1 million. You're also going to pay probably $800,000 in interest over the lifetime of your mortgage. You are not going to have any money, unless you're a doctor or a lawyer, left over. This is especially if you're having kids at the end of the month. And your house is probably going to be too small for you. The condos that we've been building in Toronto are a joke. I don't know how any family can live in a lot of these places. Some of the latest ones don't even have ovens. There's not even a space for an oven there. I guess their vision was that kids just don't need to cook anymore, right? Because the economy is doing so great. Well, the economy is doing so great that I buy my spaghetti sauce in bulk. 24 cans at a time. The economy is awful. So yeah, not only are you not going to be able to have a decent lifestyle after you pay your mortgage if you decide to take that route. Inflation is here, and while it's on the decline, that doesn't mean prices are going down. It just means they're going up a little bit less slowly. But it's ridiculous, the prices of things here. There are foods now that, for me personally, now I allow my son more than I have, but there are foods now that I generally ban. Some of it is fresh vegetables and fruit, because they're ridiculously expensive. But other things are like cereal, like boxed cereal, is ridiculously expensive. Going out to a restaurant is a joke. People used to complain, because when I used to go to a restaurant, I wanted to go to a really nice steakhouse with a bottle of wine and all that stuff. Ordering Uber Eats now costs more for junk food than what it used to cost me to go to Barbarian's downtown. Wine aside. And of course, I'm not getting wine with my junk food. So it's pathetic. It's not ending anytime soon. And the thought that we can just bring in millions of people to resolve this is proven completely wrong, because now everything else in our society is falling apart as a result, and it's driving up the actual costs. Might not be driving up the cost of apples anymore, but it's definitely driving up the cost of living, and people are on the edge. People that make good salaries could be living on the streets at any time. The elderly are living in very precarious positions if they decided to sell their homes. Like, a lot of people would have sold them like 20 years ago, and now they're in a position where they don't know where they're going to be renting and where they could possibly afford to rent, right? So that's where we are. Now, the solution, a lot of people, let me take a drink break here. The solution that keeps coming up is that the Conservatives are going to win the next election. Now, if the Conservatives, and I'm talking federal, win the next election, they may very well get rid of the carbon tax, and that's going to save people like your average person. It could save them quite a bit of money. All you have to do is look at your gas bill. And if you run a business, it could save you, like for a small business, it looks like it could save people $500 to $1,000 a month on that. And that's not going to save the economy, and that's not going to save Canada. But what are you really going to get with the Conservatives? So I've already talked about, Doug Ford, he's a Conservative, tried to generally push the people working in healthcare into poverty. He cares nothing about them. He did nothing to try to save the healthcare system at all. He doesn't care. Now, people will say the federal Conservatives are different. Well, no, they're actually not, because they're all good friends with each other, so don't give me that. But here's an example. So, as I was saying, part of the problem in Canada is that rent is overly expensive, and we don't have enough places for people to live. Here is Han Lee from British Columbia. It was a pleasure meeting with landlords who have been affected by the recent short-term rental policy change implemented by the BC government. Thank you for sharing your concerns and raising your voices with such strength. Let us unite to put an end to government intrusion into our daily lives and reclaim our property rights. And he tags Pierre Poilievre in there. Hanley is a joke. Reclaim our property rights. In case anyone was born yesterday or has had no knowledge of anything in the world, we have had zoning bylaws for quite a long time in Canada, and we have them for a reason, right? And there is absolutely no property right that you are born with where you can just buy a regular property on a street and turn it into a hotel. And anyone that thinks that they do have that property right is full of crap. And not only that, I'm going to say they are working against the Canadian economy. And they can bleat on all they want, but all you have to do is look at the guy who is like the lobbyist for Airbnb. I made some points on his Twitter, and he blocked me. Why? Because he knows he's full of crap. He absolutely knows that he's full of crap, and he cannot deal with an argument because he's wrong. So anyway, if you think Pierre's going to come in and be like, I'm going to make your rents more affordable and all this, no, look at Doug Ford. He got rid of rent controls. There was a story, now, a lot of people were like, these two girls were wrong, but there was a story, these girls were complaining about the place they were living at, and they didn't want to pay the rent increase as a result, but they were living in a new build, and no one said to them, don't you know, Doug Ford got rid of rent caps on your new build. Your landlord can charge you whatever. So he tripled their rent. He didn't evict them. He tripled their rent. That's the negotiating tactic that we have now in Ontario, thanks to Doug Ford, right? Doug Ford has done nothing but try to destroy the working class and put all of the money into landowners. All you have to do is look at the Greenbelt, right? Pierre Poilievre talks a good story, but if you look at what Han Lee posted, there's not going to be any help for rent across this country. I doubt there's going to be any help for healthcare. Healthcare is an absolute disaster. I know a person that had pericarditis and was in the hospital just recently and had to sit up in a chair. This is an elderly person in a hallway all night before they could get to this person who would have been, I've had pericarditis before, would have been in incredible pain. Now, a very similar thing happened to me. It took, I think, 8 or 9 hours before the pandemic. So this is not a new thing, but it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And Pierre's not going to do anything to help with that, right? The only thing that I think the federal Conservatives could possibly do, because they're really putting their worst foot forward, right? They are really sending out the idiots of the party at this point in time. But the thing that they could actually do, because they are so absolutely stupid and incompetent, is that they could crash the entire Canadian economy because our debt could be labeled junk if we keep up where we're going. Same thing can happen with Trudeau, right? Trudeau has absolutely no concept of where he's going right now. I don't think he has any plan. He has royally goofed everything to a point where he can't fix it. The Conservatives can't fix it. The NDP are useless, right? So I'm calling. I'm going to give you another example about the Conservatives, how great they are, and this is about Kimberly Rogers. This is under this was the previously worst government we ever had in Ontario. It was the Harris government, but somehow Doug Ford has made Harris look like he was almost competent enough to open a bag of chips. Okay, I mean, Harris's big achievement was he took a highway that we had been paying tolls on, where the tolls were eventually going to go away after the highway was paid for, and sold it to private organizations so that the tolls would be there essentially for infinity by the looks of things. And yet the provincial Conservatives in question period just recently were blaming other parties for tolls. No, it is the Conservative Party that sold off that highway, and that's why we are still paying tolls on it. And people can lose their license if they don't pay their tolls. It's an absolute joke. Harris was, before Doug Ford, the absolute worst premier we had in Ontario. But this is the story of Kimberly Rogers, and this is about how full of hatred the Conservative Party is, and how this is never ever going to change. Now, there was a part of the Conservative Party when it was called the Progressive Conservative Party where there were progressive minds, and it wasn't about hatred of the poor, etc. But now it certainly is, okay? But Kimberly Rogers was... Let me just refresh my memory completely on this and then be accurate about it. Okay, I'm switching mics because there's noise in the house suddenly, so I'll have to deal with that. So, yes, I want to talk about if you think that the Conservatives are going to usher in an era of affordability with housing and that they suddenly care about people that are living rough, I think you have another thing coming. And the example I'm going to give is Kimberly Rogers. So, Kimberly Rogers, a resident of Sudbury, this is from Wikipedia. Rogers was receiving standard Ontario welfare benefits of $520 per month for a single person, while paying $450 per month in rent. From 1996 to 1999, she also received a total of $49,000 in student loans from OSAP to study social services at the city's Cambrian College, and illegally received $13,500 in welfare over that same 3-year period. She graduated with a GPA of 3.5. When Rogers first began her studies, receiving both welfare and student loans was legal, but the practice was banned in 1996 by the Progressive Conservative government of Mike Harris as part of its welfare reform legislation. Rogers continued to receive both welfare and student loans after the practice became illegal. There was no evidence that she was ever informed of the change in regulations. In the fall of 1999, the Welfare Office learned of her student loans and ordered Rogers to repay $13,486 in benefits, and her welfare was reinstated. After her welfare was reinstated, the overpayment was automatically deducted from her monthly welfare check. This left Rogers with $18 each month after paying her rent and the student loans. As well, she was facing criminal charges for welfare fraud. So here we have a person who already, and there's no evidence that she knew she was doing anything wrong. She would have been advised. You know, we have welfare caseworkers that would have advised, yes, like early on, you can continue to have your welfare and you can go to school. There's no problem with that. But then the law changed, and there was nothing. There's no evidence that anything was sent to her saying, hey, you know, you can't do this anymore. But anyway, it's bad enough that with that debt that she suddenly has, and she only has $18 a month in money after paying her rent, she also now has a welfare fraud court case, which you would think in a decent society we would say, well, it seems like she didn't know. She's going to have to repay it. That's the law. There's probably no point in, going through with this. She just has to repay it. Do we have to punish her? Is she going to go to jail? Well, she was convicted of fraud, and her Ontario Works suspended her welfare benefits for 6 months. And then she was placed in house arrest. Okay? So, with no source of income, Roger's landlord temporarily agreed to reduce her rent to $300 a month. Decent landlord. Not double the rent to get her out, right? Because that's what would happen today with some of these landlords. Community groups and the Social Planning Council of Greater Sudbury rallied to find food and financial assistance for her. I mean, the courts left her to die, right? Her doctor lobbied the government to have drug benefits, which had previously been covered by welfare, reinstated because Rogers was unable to pay for her prescribed medications. Okay? A Toronto lawyer, Sean Duarte, launched a constitutional appeal on Rogers' behalf, successfully having Rogers' welfare suspension reversed by Judge Gloria Epstein. Epstein ruled that for a member of our community carrying an unborn child to be homeless and deprived of basic sustenance is a situation that would adversely affect the public, its dignity, its human rights commitments, and its health care resources. Rogers' body was found in her apartment on the 11th of August, 2001 by her boyfriend. Okay? She was living through a heat wave without any air conditioning and was under house arrest. So she could not leave the house. And I think it is said here that later on that it was the cause of death was suicide by amitriptyline overdose. What a society we are here in Canada. Everyone has such a great respect for how great we are in Canada. Here we have a person that, by the looks of it, committed welfare fraud unknowingly and then was punished in the sense that she now has to pay this back even though she's extremely poor and she's pregnant. But that's not good enough for us in Canada. We have to put her in house arrest. We have to embarrass her. We have to make her feel like she's an absolute nobody. It's an absolutely disgusting way to treat people, I'm going to give you an example because I get sick of all the right-wing people. I mentioned earlier I grew up in a place, my father worked in the steel mills earlier on. And I grew up, we were generally on disability because my dad had been through a lot and a lot of things happened. And he ended up on disability by the end, right? And, I clawed my way out of that. And I lived with my father, and I ended up going to university, and then I ended up getting good jobs. And there's always this stigma that we collected welfare. I'm going to tell you right now, the taxes that I have paid and the jobs that I've helped to create in this city have probably repaid any of the money my father got 20 to 50 times. I'm so sick of hearing about it. We have to protect people, especially those people that have children from an economic standpoint, but I think we have to protect everyone. But those people that have children, children are our opportunity for the future. And you never know what these children may be. And attacking the poor is a sign of a society that is in decline. And we were in decline back then, and we are now living in the decline that we built for ourselves through mean-spiritedness, the aversion to paying taxes versus instead buying property. And one thing I want to say, Canadians believe in buying property because there is no capital gains tax on selling a place that you have lived in. because we hate taxes so much. So all of this comes around to all the same stuff. But the Conservatives are not going to come out and change things. They're going to, for the better. They're going to change things for the worse. I can guarantee it, because that's what they always do, because they are mean-spirited. All you have to do is listen to them talk, right? Listen to some of the things Pierre has said about Native Canadians. Like, it's just a joke, right? Aboriginal Canadians. It's pathetic. But that's the mean-spiritedness. It's not going to get us anywhere. It never got us anywhere in the past. It's not going to get us anywhere now. But can we fix Canada? The only way Canada can be fixed is that we actually allow a recession to happen, which is going to be horribly painful, make things much worse than it is now. But at the end of it, rebalance the economy to the point where we may be able to move forward without complete stagnation. Right now, I don't think there's, especially if you want to have children, there's no reason to be in this country. Makes no sense at all. And it was a quick change, but it's here now, and I don't see it going away unless our incompetence gets so bad that we destroy everything. So that's my uplifting. I wanted to be able to come out with solutions. What solutions can there possibly be when we are now we fund everything through debt, and people, like an entire generation, is going broke on property? I don't know what the solution is to that. I think we're looking at several years of horrible times in this country. Hopefully, I'm proven wrong. In this case, I'd love to be proven wrong. But that's where we've gotten. It's on us, and it's on all the political parties we've had, especially those filled with cowardice. For example, actually, one last thing. We've known for a long time that we needed to put a lid on the price of houses. But the Liberals just did not have the guts to actually do it. And it reminds me of some conversations that I saw with Liberal Adam Vaughan on Twitter, where he said, how would you feel if you bought a house and it went down 10% in value? And this was a major concern of his. That should not be your concern. Your concern should be, how do we make sure that the economy is well balanced and is providing for the citizens of this country? It's not about someone bought a house and they can never lose money on it. That makes absolutely no sense. Are you going to bail out people that lose money on Bitcoin or Nvidia if it ever goes down? It's really a lack of focus on what we actually need. But that was a government that came in during good times, and I think they only know good times, and now the bad times are here, and they don't know what to do. Okay, so that's the end of my story. If anyone has anything positive to say about any politician that has any ounce of an idea of what to do in this country, put it in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. Thanks.